Well, I hope everybody loves my hair, because you better. I don't know what that construction crane is building. This is, the old Leno studios over here. I'm here on the deck of iHeartMedia Burbank. And and let me you know what I want to do? I want to turn my Wi-Fi off. There we go. Okay, now we're back. Here on the deck of iHeart, as you can see. It says iHeart Los Angeles, but we're in Burbank. We have this really nice deck out here. And that's the the former Leno studio, the NBC studio, the Tonight Show studio. We also have free mochi for employees. This is the best part. If you want to be a fat ass, then come in here and just take all the mochi that you want. If you've never had mochi, it's that Japanese ice cream that's in the sweet rice soft bun, and then there's ice cream in the middle of it. It's really, really good. This is our red room here, and then we have a theater in here. But you can't. There you go. There's a theater in here. This is where we do those KFI. Hey, meet the air personalities besides Brian. Those are always fun to avoid or not be invited to. This is construction. I don't know what's going on there. But anyway, tonight, this is the 40th anniversary of Operation Eagle Claw, which was the failed hostage rescue attempt in Iran. It was the night of April 24th and the morning of April 25th. So it was 40 years ago. And in hour number 3 tonight, I'll go into deep detail on that. And then I have a request out to Angry Tom Bigley, who is a Delta Force veteran, though he wasn't in Delta until about 91, 92. But the lessons from Operation Eagle Claw resonated throughout Delta, and they do to this day. And the lessons have to do with planning, operations, logistics, leadership, personnel. They learned it all. Operation Eagle Claw was an overly ambitious plan, and the failures could be seen in the planning. No one knew it yet at the time. In World War II, it was learned by the British kind of early on when Churchill wanted, a few thousand rough men to cause havoc in Europe until an invasion could be effected. The British learned pretty early on that when you're doing commando operations, you need unitary command. You need one guy in charge who has the vision, the whole thing. And then if you require naval assets, aviation assets, regular army assets, whatever, then whoever gives up those assets has to be under the command of the overall commander. There can be no vice commanders, things like that. We learned those lessons as well in World War II with the 1st Special Service Force, and then we learned them in Korea. We relearned them in Vietnam, but then everyone decided collectively, let's just forget these. So when Delta Force was formed several years before the Iranian hostage crisis, by the way, here's the gun show. Hey, they had not bothered to check the history of special operations. Here's the nuts and bolts of what Operation Eagle Claw was. The idea was that a force of U.S. Army commandos called Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta would fly on C-130s to an island off of Oman called Masira Island, where they would wait one night. The next night, on the 24th, a bunch of Navy helicopters flown by Marines. A bunch of the Navy's brand new 3-engine variant of the CH-53 Sea Stallion, still a single rotor, but an extremely powerful helicopter. Those would take off, and they would go to a place called Desert One. Now, there was going to be 8 of them. Mission critical was no-go was 6 or less. What would happen at Desert One was that the Delta Force guys would take off in C-130s, Air Force C-130s, from Masira, Goat Island off Oman. They would fly undetected into Iran to a place that had been surveyed a month before by Delta legend Dick Meadows. And it would be laid out with landing lights, the whole thing. And the C-130s would land there. And then the helicopters, the Navy helicopters off of the carrier Nimitz, would meet up with the C-130s, the Navy carriers with Marine pilots. They would meet up at Desert One, and the commandos would get on the helicopters and fly that night to Desert Two. And at Desert Two, CIA assets on the ground would meet up with them in the mountains north of Tehran. They would get on trucks, drive to downtown Tehran to the American embassy, assault the embassy by ladder, getting over the walls, take out all the sleeping students who were guards, rescue every single one of the hostages, and bring them to a adjacent soccer stadium. Now, at that soccer stadium, specially equipped C-130s were going to land with a rocket-assisted braking. No shit. And then they would load up with commandos and hostages, and then they would take off from the soccer stadium with rocket-assisted takeoff. You can go on YouTube and you can see the results of one of those tests, by the way. Well, anyway, what happened was the Marine pilots flying the Navy helicopters had never practiced the mission. They were not briefed for the weather conditions in Iran in April and the possibility of these gigantic sandstorms called haboobs. And sure enough, back, another guy, his engines got so fucked up, he had to be picked up by another helicopter. By the time they landed at Desert One, there were only 6 helicopters, and one of them was not going to be working anyway. So they were down below the safety margin for the operation. So they made the call to wrap it up and let's fly back. But wait, there's more. In the meantime, an Iranian bus out of fucking nowhere drove right into Desert One. Rangers that were there doing security lit up the bus, hit it with a law rocket. Now they've got 40 Iranian civilians under guard. They don't know what to do with them. So the idea is, let's take everybody back to Masira. The Masira Island will recock for tomorrow night, and the lame duck helicopters will blow them in place. So now the helicopters have to refuel. So what happens is they begin hovering on the ground to get to a fuel point on the C-130s. One of the C-130s brought extra fuel for the helicopters. That was going to refuel them at Desert One anyway. It was at this point that one of the helicopters got disoriented. Again, Marine pilots who had never practiced this mission, that one of the helicopters banked into the cockpit of the C-130. Everything went turbo. The C-130 flight deck in flames. Everyone's dead. The crew of that CH-53, all the Marines dead. Some of the Air Force guys caught in the back of the C-130 didn't make it out. I believe 11 Americans were left there. Everybody else gets on C-130s. They leave the Iranians there in the desert, and off they go. And that was how Operation Eagle Claw ended. Immediately, in the after-action report, the Army was quick to identify, you know what, there were too many commanders. There should have been one commander, and the commander should have been God. And we need a thing. We have European Command, EUCOM. We have Pacific Command, PACCOM. We need a Special Operations Command. We need SOCOM. So that's what SOCOM came out of. And it was at this point that Delta Force also said, oh yeah, here's another thing. We can rely on nobody. but fellow Army people. We need Army aviators flying Army helicopters for our missions. We cannot beg, borrow, and steal helicopters and pilots who do not intend to satisfy the mission requirements and won't even train with us. So it was a failure from top to bottom. The shame of it is that no one looked at it from the outside and said, this has no chance of working. This is overly complex. You haven't actually worked together and done a dry run. This is going to fall apart because you're not factoring the unseen factor, and the unseen factor will always fuck you over. So anyway, my buddy Tom Bigley, Angry Tom Bigley, if we can get him on, we'll do it tonight. But otherwise, in the 10 o'clock hour for Waraholics, a deep dive into Operation Eagle Claw, 40 years ago tonight, on the deserts of Iran. It was a rebirth, an opportunity to reinvent American special operations, and we did it, to our credit, better than anybody else in the world. We have the best trained, best equipped, best outcome special operations people, taking advantage of everything the U.S. military can have. So that'll be at 10 p.m., Operation Eagle Claw. And I'll rehook down there in studio, but until then, I'll see you at 8 p.m. and the Dark Secret Place. Here comes my thumb.